At 71 years old, she stood in her Parisian studio, scissors in hand, ready to face the harshest critics of her life. Most people at this age were retiring, settling into quiet routines. But Gabrielle Chanel was about to do something that seemed impossible: restart a career that had been dormant for 15 years. The fashion journalists arrived, sharpening their pencils and their tongues. They expected failure. They wanted to witness the fall of a legend who dared to return after so long. After all, fashion belonged to the young, didn't it? At 71, wasn't it simply too late? But what happened that February day in 1954 would prove something remarkable, something that every person over 50 needs to hear. Because Coco Chanel didn't just make a comeback, she built her greatest legacy in the final 17 years of her life. She created designs that are still worn today, 7 decades later. How did a 71-year-old woman facing an industry that worships youth become more influential in her 70s than she had been in her 40s? The answer will surprise you, and it might just change how you see your own possibilities. To understand this moment, we need to go back to 1939. Gabrielle Chanel, then 56, was at the peak of her career. Her fashion house employed over 4,000 people. She had revolutionized how women dressed, freeing them from restrictive corsets and elaborate gowns. She was wealthy, famous, and powerful. Then World War II arrived, and everything changed. In 1939, she made a decision that shocked everyone. She closed her fashion house. For the next 15 years, Chanel lived in self-imposed exile in Switzerland. No designs, no collections, no presence in the industry she had transformed. By 1954, the fashion world had moved on without her. New designers had emerged. Christian Dior's new look dominated Parisian fashion, with its nipped waists and full skirts, everything Chanel had fought against. Her style seemed outdated, a relic of the past. Friends told her to enjoy retirement. Financial advisors reminded her she was already wealthy. Why risk her reputation? Why face potential humiliation? At 71, with a 15-year gap in her career, the odds of success seemed impossibly small. But Chanel felt something gnawing inside her. It wasn't about money or fame. She looked at women wearing uncomfortable, restrictive clothing again and felt frustrated. She had something to say, something to offer. The question wasn't whether she was too old. The question was whether she could ignore this calling. Most people facing their 70s would have chosen the safe path, the comfortable path. But Chanel had learned something essential during her years away, something about timing, purpose, and the unique power that comes with age and experience. When Chanel announced her return in early 1954, the fashion press smelled blood. One journalist wrote, "At her age, this seems like a desperate attempt to relive past glory." Another suggested she should leave fashion to those who understand modern women. The prevailing attitude was clear: her time had passed. The first collection debuted on February 5, 1954. Chanel, at 71, climbed the famous mirrored staircase of her atelier at 31 Rue Cambon, watching through the mirrors as models presented her designs below. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the weight of this moment. The French press destroyed her. They called the collection old-fashioned and a melancholy retrospective. Fashion critics wrote that she had nothing new to offer. Headlines declared her comeback a failure. For many people, this would have been the end, confirmation that they were right to fear trying again. But here's where Chanel's age became her secret advantage. At 71, she had already survived abandonment, poverty, war, and exile. Harsh reviews couldn't break someone who had lived through what she had lived through. She had perspective that younger designers lacked. More importantly, she understood something the young critics missed. She wasn't designing for Parisian fashion editors. She was designing for real women living real lives. Women who needed comfortable, elegant clothes that made them feel confident, not costumes that restricted their movement. While the French press mocked her, something unexpected happened. American buyers loved the collection. Life magazine, with its massive American readership, praised her designs. American women, particularly working women and mothers, recognized immediately what Chanel offered: sophisticated clothes that were actually comfortable to wear. The iconic Chanel suit, with its braid-trimmed cardigan jacket and graceful skirt, became the uniform of accomplished women. The design was brilliant in its simplicity: pockets placed where hands naturally rested, weighted chains sewn into jacket hems so they hung perfectly, linings in contrasting colors that made women smile when they put them on. Month by month, collection by collection, Chanel proved the critics wrong, not by abandoning her vision to please them, but by staying true to what she knew women needed. By 1955, just 1 year after her supposedly failed comeback, she introduced the 2.55 handbag, named for its creation date, February 1955. That quilted bag with its chain strap became one of the most iconic accessories in fashion history. What made Chanel successful at 71 wasn't that she tried to compete with younger designers on their terms. She didn't chase trends. She didn't attempt to prove she was still with it. Instead, she leaned into what only age and experience could provide: wisdom, perspective, and an unshakable knowledge of what truly mattered. She once told a reporter, "Fashion is made to become unfashionable. Style never goes out of fashion." At 71, she understood this deeply in a way she couldn't have at 30 or even 50. There's a particular moment that reveals her mindset. In 1959, at 76, a young assistant suggested she update her designs to be more modern, more youthful. Chanel looked at her and said, "I don't create fashion. I am fashion." It wasn't arrogance. It was the confidence of someone who had lived long enough to know their own value. She worked until the very end. On January 10th, 1971, at 87 years old, Chanel spent the day preparing her next collection. That evening, she retired to her room at the Ritz Hotel and passed away peacefully. Her final words were reportedly about her spring collection. "This is how you die when you are 87, ready for your next show." Think about this. Chanel worked actively in fashion for 17 years after her comeback at 71. That's 17 years of creativity, influence, and impact. 17 years that produced some of her most enduring designs. 17 years that cemented her legacy as one of history's greatest designers. The fashion house she rebuilt after 71 is now worth over $15 billion. The designs she created in her 70s and 80s are still worn today. Her comeback wasn't just successful, it became the foundation of an eternal legacy. Here's what's remarkable. If Chanel had listened to the voices telling her she was too old, if she had accepted that her time had passed, the world would have lost 17 years of brilliance. We would have lost the refined Chanel suit, the 2.55 bag, and countless other innovations. But more importantly, we would have lost the story itself. The story of a woman who proved that 71 isn't an ending. It can be a powerful new beginning. Now, let's talk about you. Because Chanel's story isn't just about fashion. It's about what becomes possible when we stop believing the limiting stories society tells us about age. First lesson, your experience is not obsolete. It's your advantage. Chanel didn't succeed despite being 71. She succeeded because she was 71. She had knowledge, perspective, and confidence that younger designers couldn't possess. What you've lived through, what you've learned, what you understand about life, this isn't outdated, it's invaluable.
Second lesson, starting again is different from starting over. Chanel didn't abandon everything she knew. She brought her wisdom, skills, and vision forward into a new chapter. You don't need to reinvent yourself completely. You need to apply what you already know in a new way. That passion you set aside, that dream you postponed, that skill you haven't used, it's still there and it's still valuable. Third lesson, the right people will recognize your value. The French critics rejected Chanel, but American women embraced her. When you step forward with your gifts, not everyone will understand. That's fine. The people who need what you offer will find you. Your job isn't to convince everyone. Your job is to show up authentically.
Maybe you've been thinking it's too late to start that business, write that book, learn that skill, or pursue that calling. Maybe you've heard voices, external or internal, saying your time is past. Chanel heard those same voices at 71 and chose to ignore them. She gave the world 17 more years of brilliance. What could you create, contribute, or become if you gave yourself permission to begin again? Here's your challenge for today. Identify one thing you've been telling yourself you're too old to do. Just one. Maybe it's learning a language, starting a creative project, changing careers, going back to school, or finally pursuing that business idea. Write it down. Then, underneath write, Chanel was 71. Let that sink in. She faced an entire industry that said she was finished, and she proved them wrong for 17 years. You have time. You have wisdom, you have value that only comes from having lived. The question isn't whether you're too old. The question is, what are you being called to do with the precious years ahead? If this story moved you, click that like button. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of real people who discovered their greatest chapters later in life. And in the comments, tell me, what's one thing you're going to stop saying you're too old for? Remember Coco Chanel at 71, scissors in hand, ready to prove the world wrong. Your comeback story is waiting to be written. The only question is, are you ready to pick up your scissors? Your best chapter might still be ahead.